The folder had been on his desk for 6 days. He hadn't moved it, hadn't opened it again, hadn't given Do-yeon instruction about Soo-yeon beyond 4 words delivered the morning after the garden. Handle it. Not yet. Which Do-yeon had received with the expression of a man who understood that not yet was doing the work of several much larger decisions that hadn't been made yet and might not be made cleanly when they finally were. The household had noticed something had shifted without knowing what. This was its own kind of information, that the people who lived and worked inside this estate had become so finely calibrated to Yi-won's emotional atmosphere that a change in its quality registered before any visible evidence arrived. The staff moved with a different texture of quiet, not the practiced invisibility of people managing around grief, which they had been doing for 3 years with the expertise of long practice, but something more uncertain, more watchful. The grief had been a known weather system, predictable in its patterns, mappable in its pressure zones, something you could dress for. This was something else. Something that didn't have a name on any forecast any of them had encountered before. Imani noticed it on the second morning after the garden. She was crossing the main hallway returning from the school pickup run, Ariam walking close at her side. One hand wrapped around 2 of Imani's fingers in the loose, trusting grip she had developed somewhere around week 2 and never relinquished. When she passed 2 staff members who stopped their conversation not at her approach, which was what they usually did, but at the sound of Yi-won's footsteps on the floor above. Both of them went still simultaneously. Tracked the sound as it moved across the ceiling above them. Exchanged a look that contained something she couldn't fully decode from the outside. Not fear. Something adjacent to fear that had hope threaded through it, the way certain kinds of weather look threatening from a distance and turn out to be the rain that ends a drought. She filed it and kept walking. Ariam looked up at her as they climbed the stairs. He walked differently this morning, Imani said, not to the child exactly, but not to her. Did you notice? Ariam considered this with the seriousness she brought to all observations. Then she nodded once, a small, decisive nod, the nod of someone who had noticed and had been waiting to see if anyone else had. Ariam woke that Wednesday asking for the orange, not in words. She appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6:47 a.m. with her bear tucked under one arm and her empty hand extended palm up in Imani's direction. The universal child gesture for "give me the thing I want," delivered with the particular unself-consciousness of a person who has only recently rediscovered that wanting things is permitted. It was so ordinary, so completely without the careful watchfulness that had characterized every one of her movements in the first 2 weeks. Imani had to turn back to the stove for a full 30 seconds before she trusted her face enough to turn around. She's asking, she thought. She's asking for something, and she isn't afraid of the asking. She put the orange in the small, open palm without ceremony, without making it a moment, because making it a moment would be the fastest way to end it. Ariam took it to her stool at the counter and began the slow, focused work of peeling segment by careful segment, the citrus smell releasing into the kitchen's morning warmth, with the concentrated satisfaction of someone who has discovered that wanting things and receiving them is a system that actually functions, which for this particular child in this particular house had not been a lesson that came easily or early. Yi-won appeared in the doorway at 7:03. He had started doing this, appearing at the edges of their mornings without announcing himself, without fully entering, occupying the kitchen threshold with the particular quality of someone who has discovered a window that lets in warmth and hasn't yet decided whether they're allowed to open it further. He was in a dark suit today. His long hair was pulled back at the nape of his neck for the first time, held there with a single dark tie, and the change in his face's geography was significant. With the hair forward, it softened things, provided a frame, gave the eye somewhere to travel before arriving at the full weight of his features. Pulled back, there was nowhere to go but directly to the sharp line of his jaw, the prominence of his cheekbones, the specific quality of his eyes when they were fully exposed and unframed. He looked, Imani thought, and then set the thought carefully aside, more like himself than she had ever seen him. Ariam looked up from her orange, looked at her father, looked at the orange in her hands, made a decision. She pulled one segment free, the most perfect one, the one she had been saving by working around it, though she could not have explained how Imani knew this, and held it up in his direction with the solemn offering gesture of someone extending something they value to someone they are cautiously deciding to value more. The kitchen went very still in the way that kitchens go still, when something small and enormous is happening at the same time in the same 12 square feet, and everyone present understands this without being able to say so. Yiwon crossed the kitchen. Not quickly, not with the careful, measured slowness of the garden scene either, but with a deliberateness that said he had decided something in the night and was acting on it before the decision could fold back on itself and reconsider. He crouched to his daughter's level at the counter stool, something he had been doing more often, the crouching, the coming down to her rather than waiting for her to come up to him, and took the orange segment from her small hand and ate it. And Ariam watched him do this with the evaluating expression of a scientist whose hypothesis is being confirmed in real time, and who finds the confirmation both satisfying and slightly obvious. He looked up at Imani over his daughter's head. "Good morning," he said. 2 words, the same words he used every morning he appeared in this kitchen. The same language, the same basic grammatical structure, the same number of syllables, completely different from every other time he had said them. Carrying something in their register that had not been there before, not warmth exactly, nothing so simple as warmth, but the specific quality of someone who has stopped pretending that the temperature in a room is something other than what it is. "Morning," she said, and turned back to the stove, and kept her face entirely to herself, and listened to him pour his own coffee for the first time in 6 weeks of mornings. Behind her, she heard Ariam offer him another orange segment. She heard him take it. She heard her make a sound, not a word, not yet, but a sound. Small and involuntary and satisfied, the sound of a plan working. Imani turned the heat down under the rice and said nothing, and felt the particular quality of a morning that has decided to be different from all the mornings before it. The call from Busan came at noon. Imani knew this not because anyone told her, but because she was returning Ariam from the afternoon school run. They had developed a route that took them through the small park 2 blocks from the school gate, where Ariam liked to collect fallen leaves and evaluate them by some internal criteria that Imani had been observing for 3 weeks without fully cracking the logic of, when she passed the study door upon returning to the estate and heard Yiwon's voice through it. Low. Korean. With the particular flattened affect of a man conducting a conversation that requires him to sound like he is feeling nothing while actually processing something that has weight and edges and consequences he is calculating in real time. She had been in this household long enough to read the specific music of a conversation about something that has gone wrong. She had heard that music before in the first week, when a junior member of the organization had apparently made a significant error in the northern corridor, and the correction had been swift and invisible and communicated through the specific quality of silence that followed. She knew its key. This was the same music in a different key. Not the key of correction, the key of something older and colder than correction. The key of reckoning. She took Ariam upstairs. The child's room in the late afternoon had become one of Imani's favorite places in the estate. The low light coming through the sheer curtains turning everything the color of weak tea. The small watercolor set arranged on the low table by the window. The particular smell of the lavender soap and the old worn bear, and the specific scent that belonged to Ariam herself. Something clean and young, and faintly of the citrus she had been consuming in increasing quantities since the orange system was established. She set up the watercolor paper, filled the small ceramic water cup from the bathroom tap, arranged the paints in the order Ariam preferred, warm colors on the left progressing to cool colors on the right, a system she had established herself, and that Imani had learned to replicate without being asked. Ariam settled at the table with the focused serenity of a person entering a state they have been anticipating. Her brushstrokes over the past weeks had changed, less careful, less contained, less like someone painting inside invisible lines they were afraid to cross. More confident, taking up more of the page, going to the edges. Today she was painting a house. It was a large house. Imani recognized its general proportions, the wide facade, the suggestion of multiple floors, the garden indicated by green sweeps at the bottom of the page, and in the garden, a fountain. This one different from the fountain that sat dry in the actual garden below them, this one rendered in confident blue strokes, the water moving, the circular basin full. 3 figures stood in the garden beside the fountain, one tall, with long black lines for hair that fell past the shoulders. One medium, with a dark cloud of locks indicated in loose circular brushwork. One very small, with a brown smear held in both arms that was unmistakably intended to be a bear. And above the house, added last, with a fresh brush, in the most confident stroke of the whole painting, a yellow circle. Bright and round and entirely without ambiguity, Imani looked at the painting for a long time. Ariam set down her brush and looked at it too, with the evaluating distance of an artist assessing completed work. "Fountain has water in it," Imani said. Ariam looked at her, the expression of someone who finds this observation accurate and is willing to confirm it. "Is that what you want?" Imani said. "For it to have water in it." Ariam looked back at the painting, at the blue strokes she had laid down with such certainty. Then she nodded, not the small checking nod, the big one, the full tilt of her head that meant obviously, completely, without reservation. "Okay," Imani said softly. "Okay." She looked at the yellow circle above the house for a moment, and then at the 3 figures by the full fountain, and thought about what it meant that a child who had not spoken in 3 years was painting the future with water in it and sun above it, and all 3 of them standing together in the light. If that painting just did something to your chest, hold it. Because what's coming next is going to test whether the house in the picture is possible. Stay with this. Do-yeon found Imani in the library that evening at 7:30. He knocked properly this time. A full, regular knock at a reasonable hour, not the midnight urgency of a man uncertain he should be where he was. The knock itself was information. Everything in this household communicated through the texture of its sounds, and this knock said, "I am coming to you as myself, not as the person who manages things, and I need to talk." She was in the worn reading chair, not pretending to read, just sitting in the amber lamp warmth with the window dark behind her and the bookshelf smell of old paper, and the particular quality of a room that has absorbed decades of thought and holds it in its walls the way old wood holds weather. "The call from Busen," she said, before he had fully sat down in the opposite chair. He looked at her. "You heard. Enough of it." She watched him settle, saw the way he arranged himself in the chair, the particular posture of a man who is tired in a way that has accumulated over time rather than arriving all at once. "What did Soo-yeon give them?" He was quiet for a moment. Considering, she understood, not whether to tell her, but how, which angle, which order, what to lead with and what to follow with, because Do-yeon did not speak without architecture. "A name," he said finally. "Someone embedded in the Busan Port Authority. 4 years of document management for the Southern Import Corridor. That's significant. It's designed to be significant enough to be a message without being significant enough to be a war." He pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose, a gesture she recognized as his physical equivalent of a sigh. "The park remnants in Busan don't have the infrastructure for a war. What they have is enough leverage to disrupt 4 years of established operations, enough to cost money, enough to cost relationships, enough to cost Yiwon's attention." He lowered his hand. "The message is that she has more, that this was a demonstration of inventory, not a sale." She looked at him steadily. "She's blackmailing him. She has been blackmailing him for 3 years, Do-yeon said. The words came out flat and careful, the words of someone who has been sitting with this knowledge for long enough that its shape has become familiar without becoming comfortable. The currency just changed. Before it was silence, her silence about what she knew, purchased by proximity and access, and the kind of quiet influence that comes from being trusted in a house like this one." He looked at the lamp between them. "Now she wants something different. The park connection gives her a new buyer for what she holds. Which means the old arrangement is ending. Which means it's becoming unstable," he said. "Which is more dangerous than it ending." Lamp threw its warm circle between them. Beyond its reach, the library was dark, the bookshelves receding into shadow, the window showing nothing but the night pressed flat against the glass. "Folder," Imani said. "Walk me through exactly what it contains." "About Yeonjai." Do-yeon was quiet for long enough that the silence had weight. "Testimony," he said at last. "From a man named Park Hyun-soo. He was Soo-yeon's driver for 6 years. He was present not at the scene of Yeonjai's death, but present in the chain of events that led to it. He was given documentation to falsify after the fact. He signed it and was paid enough to leave South Korea permanently. He came back. Has a daughter here." Do-yeon's voice changed slightly on that word, daughter, a fractional shift in texture that she noticed and filed. "She was born after he left. She's 4 years old. He decided." He paused. "He decided his daughter needed a father who could look at her." The library held that sentence for a moment. Outside the window, somewhere in the estate's garden, a late autumn wind moved through the bare branches of the Zelkova tree at the wall's edge and made a sound like something breathing. "Testimony says Yeonjai's death was not ordered by the park syndicate," Do-yeon continued. His voice had acquired the specific flatness of someone reading from a memorized document. not because he felt nothing, but because he had decided that feeling nothing was the only way to get through the information. It was arranged by a party who needed Yiwon's grief to be directional, outward, toward a specific target. So that while he was looking that direction, something else could be built in the space his attention had vacated. Someone inside the Shin organization, Imani said. Someone who needed 3 years of Yiwon's resources, his attention, his alliances, all pointed at the park network like a weapon, while they built their own infrastructure using the organization's southern connections as a foundation. The specific weight of what he was describing settled into the room. Imani felt it arrive in her chest, not shock exactly, because some part of her had understood the shape of this since the night she read Kezia's email in the cold laptop light. But the arrival of a thing you have suspected becoming a thing you know carries its own distinct weight regardless of how much of it you anticipated. Driver knows the chain, she said, but not the origin. Received instruction through 2 intermediaries. He knows Suyeon was one of them. He doesn't know who gave Suyeon her instruction. Suyeon knows. Suyeon has always known. Something moved in Do-yeon's expression, not anger, not grief, something more precise than either. The specific expression of a man who has spent 10 years being excellent at his work and has just understood that his excellence has been operating inside a structure that was compromised before he arrived. She has been the load-bearing wall between that knowledge and Yiwon for 3 years, managing it, profiting from it, making herself indispensable to 2 separate parties who both needed her silence for different reasons. The person who gave the order needed her to keep Yiwon from looking inward. The park remnants needed her to keep certain documentation accessible in case they ever needed leverage. He exhaled. She has been a very careful woman for a very long time. Yiwon knows the full scope of this, the inside the organization piece. He knows what the folder contains. Do-yeon's jaw tightened. He doesn't yet know the full implication, the internal origin. I've been building toward telling him. I haven't told him yet. She looked at him. Why? The lamp flickered. A draft from somewhere in the old house finding a gap in its structure, the estate breathing through its age, the way very old buildings do, reminding you of the years inside their walls. Because when I tell him the full analysis, Do-yeon said slowly, he will stop being the man who stood in a garden at midnight and, he stopped himself, recalibrated. He will become the other version of himself, the one he's been for 3 years. The one that runs on controlled fury and strategic distance, and the absolute certainty that emotion is a vulnerability he cannot afford. He looked at the lamp. And I have been, perhaps unwisely, trying to protect the time before that happens. You've been protecting the garden, Imani said. He met her eyes. In the lamplight, his face was stripped of its daytime construction, the easy approachability, the calibrated warmth that she had understood from early on as a professional tool. What was underneath was older, more complicated. The face of a man who has been loyal for 10 years to someone he respects and has recently discovered that loyalty alone is insufficient protection against anything. Yes, he said. I have. She was quiet for a moment. The wind outside moved through the bare branches again. Somewhere in the main part of the house, she heard the distant sound of Sora moving through the kitchen, the particular footstep pattern of someone tidying up after a day. Tell him, Imani said. Everything, tonight. If I tell him tonight, he deserves to know what his wife died for, she said. Her voice was steady and unhurried and completely without apology. He deserves to stop constructing his life on partial information. He has been living inside someone else's story about what happened to his family for 3 years. Every decision he has made, every wall he has built, every distance he has put between himself and his daughter, all of it has been built on a foundation that was laid by the person who killed Yeonjae. She held Do-yeon's eyes. You tell him, tonight, even if it brings the other thing back, especially if it brings the other thing back, because the other thing, at least, will be aimed at the right target. Do-yeon sat with that for a long moment. His hands rested on his knees. The lamp between them burned steadily, then he nodded. Once. The nod of a man who has just made a decision he has been avoiding and feels in the making of it something that is not relief but is adjacent to it. He stood, paused at the library door. She drew today, he said, not a question. A house, Imani said. With water in the fountain. Something moved across his face that she couldn't fully name. Then he left, and she listened to his footsteps move down the hallway toward the study, and heard the study door open, and heard it close behind him. She sat in the lamplight for a while longer, listening to the house breathe. She was in Ariam's room for the bedtime ritual when Do-yeon went in lavender soap. Teeth. The bear retrieved from the exact center of the pillow where it had been placed that morning. The sketchbook. Tonight Ariam drew differently. She drew slowly, with a deliberateness that was less about artistic consideration and more about thinking. The way very young children sometimes draw when the act of drawing is actually the act of working something out. She went through 3 false starts, began a line, reconsidered, turned to a fresh page, began again, which was entirely unlike her usual confident approach, and Imani sat on the edge of the bed and did not comment and did not ask and did not make the silence between them anything other than what it was, which was simply space for whatever needed to happen. After nearly 25 minutes, Ariam held up the sketchbook. 2 figures, the tall one with long black hair, the medium one with dark locks, the one she always drew, but their arrangement was different from anything before it. This time the tall figure was seated, not on the ground, on something suggested by a horizontal line beneath it, a bench perhaps, or a step. And the tall figure's posture was different from how she usually drew it, slightly forward, head bent, something in the angle of the lines that communicated, with the instinctive economy of a child who cannot yet name what she sees but can render the shape of it weight. The medium figure stood beside the seated figure with one hand resting on the tall figure's back, not holding, not embracing, not any of the larger gestures, just a hand on a back. The specific, quiet, unremarkable gesture of someone who is sitting beside a person who is carrying something and has decided that the most useful thing available is not solution or comfort or words, but simply the warmth of a hand communicating, I am here. You are not carrying this in an empty room. Imani looked at the drawing for a long time. She thought about who had taught Ariam that gesture, whether anyone had. Whether she had arrived at it entirely through her own observation, watching the adults around her, filing what she saw in the particular careful archive of a child who processes most of what happens to her in silence. Did someone ever sit with you like that? She said softly. When you were sad? Ariam looked at the drawing, looked at Imani, shook her head slowly, not the small shake of correction but the larger, slower movement of a genuine no, the answer to a question about an absence. No one did, Imani said. Ariam shook her head again. Then, with the careful intention she brought to everything she considered important, she pointed at the drawing, at the medium figure, at the hand on the back of the tall figure. Her eyes found Imani's. You want me to do that for him, Imani said. Be there like that for your dad. Ariam held her gaze steadily, nodded once the way she nodded when she meant something completely and without qualification. Then she lowered the sketchbook, held it against her chest for a moment, not looking at it anymore but keeping it close, the way you keep something close when you're done saying what it needed to say but aren't ready to put it down entirely. Then she set it on the nightstand, collected her bear from the pillow, and lay down. She looked up at Imani from the pillow. Her eyes were dark and clear and very young and very old at the same time, the specific combination that had been breaking Imani's heart slowly since the first day. Go check on him, Imani said. After you're asleep. Ariam's eyes stayed on her for another moment. Then, satisfied, she tucked the bear closer and closed her eyes. She was asleep in less than 10 minutes. Imani sat in the dim room listening to the child's even breathing and the old house settling around them, and the muffled, inaudible conversation happening somewhere in the east wing, behind the study door, between a loyal man and his employer, and thought about a drawing of a hand on a back and what it meant that a 6-year-old who had not spoken in 3 years was the one orchestrating the emotional landscape of this household with greater precision and wisdom than any of the adults inside it. She didn't go to the study. She went to the kitchen instead, because the kitchen was where things between them had consistently been most real. The 6 a.m. mornings, the orange segments, the pound cake, the barley tea, and she made tea. Not the pour-over, not coffee, but the barley tea she had learned to make from watching Sarah over 3 weeks of early mornings, roasted and nutty and warm, the specific smell of something that had been Korean for centuries before this house existed and would be Korean long after it. She filled the kettle. She measured the roasted barley into the small pot. She let it steep longer than strictly necessary because the smell alone was doing something useful to the air in the room. She poured 2 cups and sat at the island and waited. He came down at 11:52 p.m. She knew it was him before she heard him. That particular shift in the quality of the house's silence that she had been cataloging since week 1 and had long since stopped pretending, she didn't feel as something distinct from simply hearing footsteps. It was the specific change in the air of a space when a person who commands it moves through it, something that had nothing to do with sound and everything to do with whatever it is that makes certain people alter the atmosphere of rooms. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, dark suit still, jacket gone somewhere between the study and here. White dress shirt open at the collar. His long hair down, she didn't know when he'd taken it out of the tie and noticed she had noticed. He stood in the doorway and looked at the 2 cups on the island, and then at her, and something in his expression, the specific quality of it, the particular angle of a face receiving an unexpected thing and adjusting to contain it, made her look back at her tea. "Do-yeon told you first," he said. 3 days ago, with the folder. He came into the kitchen, didn't sit. Stood on the opposite side of the island, the same positions, the same early morning geometry, but nothing else the same. He looked at the teacup. He picked it up in both hands, the gesture she had come to recognize as his physical response to needing something solid to hold when his hands had no useful action available to them. "Barley," he said. "It smells like the house," she said. "I thought that was right for tonight." He held the cup and looked at the steam rising from it. "Why did he go to you first?" "You should ask him that." "I'm asking you," she considered her answer with the care it deserved. "Because he thought I could sit with you when you read it without needing something from you at the same time. Everyone else in your life who loves you also needs something from you. It makes sitting with someone complicated." He was quiet. "Were you?" "I was there. You read it. You're still here and so am I. I think that's the answer." He set the cup down and walked to the kitchen window, the large one, the garden-facing one, the same view that existed above it in the study where he'd just spent 2 hours with Do-yeon taking apart 3 years of operational architecture and rebuilding the picture around a different center. The garden was dark below. The fountain dry. The stone bench without its cushion. 3 years, he said, not loudly. The voice of a man making an accounting, not a speech. Every resource. Every relationship I built after Yeonjae died. Every decision about where to apply pressure and where to hold back. All of it organized around a single premise that was installed in me by the person who created the need for it. He was quiet for a moment. "There are people in the park network who have nothing left because of what I did, because of what I believed. Because of what you were made to believe," Imani said. "By someone who needed you looking that direction. The outcome is the same. The responsibility isn't, and you know that." He turned from the window, looked at her across the kitchen island with the expression, she had learned to read it now, the specific way his face responded when something she said reached somewhere the professional management system didn't cover, of a man whose defenses have been precision targeted by someone who took the time to learn where they were. "You do that," he said. "Do what?" "Things I've been holding fused and separate them." He picked up the tea again. "Outcome and responsibility, grief and information, action and manipulation. You put them in different places and somehow their weight changes." "They were always different weights," she said. "You didn't have anyone to help you sort them, so you carried them as one thing because that was the only way to lift it." "I didn't want anyone to help me sort them," he said. There was honesty in this, not defensiveness, not performance, just the accurate statement of a fact about himself that he had stopped trying to hide, at least in this kitchen, at least from her. "I needed them fused. If I was responsible for everything then at least the weight made sense. At least I was the one in control of whether I carried it or set it down." She looked at him across the island. The barley tea between them, cooling slowly, smelling of something old and warm and specifically Korean. "Who is inside the organization?" she said. "Do you know yet?" "Direction," he said. "Not a confirmed name." "Suyo knows the name." "What are you going to do?" He looked at her for a long moment, the open collar, the long hair loose, the cup in both hands, all the architecture of his public self temporarily offline. "Tonight," he said, "I'm going to finish this tea." She held his gaze. "And after that, I'm going to go upstairs and check on my daughter." A breath, measured and deliberate. "And after that, I'm going to begin doing something I've been avoiding doing for 3 years, which is wake up in this house and decide what I actually want it to be. Not what it should be, not what protects it, what I want it to be." "That's a significant amount for one night," she said. "I'm told I've been wasting time." The corner of his mouth moved, barely, the suggestion of a direction rather than the arrival at one. "I'm choosing to believe that means there's still some left." She looked at her tea. "I need to tell you something." Almost movement dissolved. He watched her. "I knew Do-yeon's name before I came here," she said. "His name appeared in a civil court filing connected to Marcus's case. The Itaewon operational territory 3 years ago. I knew he had organizational connection to what happened in that district. I came to this job carrying that knowledge." Kitchen received this. His expression didn't change immediately. It changed the way deep water changes when something is dropped into it, the surface staying still while something far below begins moving, the disturbance traveling upward slowly, taking its time. You came into my house, he said, knowing the organizational geography, not the details inside the folder, not Suyeon, not the internal structure of what happened to Yeonjai. She held his gaze without flinching from what she found there. I came for Marcus. That was always true. Every word I said about that was true. The rest happened, she said. I didn't plan a Riem, I didn't, she stopped, found the more precise version. Nothing that matters about why I'm still here was planned, including. She stopped again because the end of that sentence required more than she had decided to commit to tonight. The silence between them was a different quality from every silence before it, not comfortable, not hostile. Not the professional quiet of two people maintaining appropriate distance. The specific charged silence of two people standing on either side of a truth that has just been placed on the table between them, and both of them simultaneously deciding what they are going to do with it. He set the cup down. He walked around the island. She didn't move. Didn't orient toward him or away. Stayed where she was and let him make whatever decision was being made. He stopped beside her. Not in front, beside. The particular positioning of someone who is not making a demand and is not retreating, who is simply choosing to be in the same small geography as another person and letting that be what it is. His long hair fell forward over his shoulder. He was close enough that she could see the specific texture of his exhaustion, not managed exhaustion, not performed capability, but the real thing. The exhaustion of a person who has been holding an enormous structural lie for 3 years and has just had it removed, and now has to figure out what all the energy that was holding it in place is supposed to do instead. My wife used to say, he said very quietly, that the most dangerous people in any room were the ones who arrived already knowing something everyone else believed was hidden. Was right, Imani said. She was right about most things. He looked at the window, the dark garden, the dry fountain barely visible in the ambient light from the estate's exterior lamps. She would have known you, within the first 10 minutes. She would have found you specifically, not made her way around the room and eventually arrived at you, but found you immediately because that was how she operated. She went directly toward the most true thing in any space. A breath. She would have decided you were worth knowing. She would have been right. Something in Imani's chest did something that she identified accurately and chose to set aside for later when there was room for it. I'm sorry, she said. For the shape of how I arrived here. For what I didn't say. I'm not sorry for being here, but I'm sorry for the parts that weren't fully honest. He looked at her. Are you going to leave? He said. The question arrived ahead of everything else, unguarded, direct, without the management system catching it first. The most honest thing his voice had produced in their entire acquaintance. No, she said. Because of Ariam, she said. No! He held her eyes for a long moment. Then he picked up his teacup and walked back to the window and stood looking at the garden, and she stayed where she was, and the barley tea cooled between them, and the dry fountain held its stillness in the dark outside, and neither of them spoke for a while. And the silence was the most honest thing the kitchen had contained. Myung-hee called at 7 a.m. the next morning, not to announce a visit. A phone call, which was unusual enough that when Sora appeared in the doorway of Ariam's room, where Imani was overseeing the morning routine, with an expression that communicated several things, simultaneously without actually saying any of them, Imani felt the specific sensation at the back of her neck that she had learned to treat as information. She wants to meet you, Sora said. Not here. Where? A tea house in Insadong. Sora hesitated with the particular hesitation of someone delivering the part of the message they were uncertain how to contextualize. She said come alone. She said to tell you she's ready to finish the sentence she started in the sitting room. Insadong on a Thursday morning was the soul that existed in the pause between old and new, narrow alleys and traditional rooflines, and the smell of roasted grain tea and street tediok from a cart near the main entrance to the alley network. An elderly woman tending it with the unhurried authority of someone who has been in this specific spot longer than the surrounding galleries and coffee shops that had grown up around her like modern plants around an old stone. The Zelkova trees along the path had dropped most of their leaves. What remained caught the thin November light and held it briefly before releasing it. The tea house was on a side alley, set back behind a wooden gate that required knowing it was there. Inside, low wooden tables, hangy screens filtering the morning light into something soft and indeterminate, the smell of various teas overlapping in a way that was complex without being overwhelming, and the specific quality of quiet that belongs to spaces that have decided sound must slow down before entering. Ma Young-hee was already there. She sat at a table near the inner wall with the posture of someone who does not adjust their posture to accommodate their environment. The environment accommodates itself to her. A pot of tea already poured, 2 cups, her cream leather handbag placed precisely beside her, her silver chignon as architectural as always. Her pale gray silk hanbok-style top against the warm wood of the tea house interior, creating a composition that was either completely accidental or the result of 71 years of knowing exactly what she looked like in any room she entered. She looked up when Imani came through the gate. Something registered in her expression, a fractional recalibration, the look of a woman checking something she expected against something she's actually seeing and finding the comparison satisfactory. Imani sat. Picked up her cup without waiting to be invited. Drank. The tea was complex bitter at the front, something sweeter at the finish, medicinal in a way that felt intentional. Sangwacha, Ma Young-hee said. It's good for clarity and for days when clarity is going to be necessary. Then it's appropriate, Imani said. The ghost of something crossed Ma Young-hee's face, not quite a smile, but the structural condition that precedes one. You told him, last night, about what you knew before you arrived. Imani looked at her. This is a small world. Ma Young-hee agreed, without apology. And he didn't send you away. No. Ma Young-hee turned her cup slightly on the table, a millimeter of rotation, the gesture of a woman making herself hold still while she processes something significant. Outside the Hanji screens, the alley sounds continued their quiet morning activity. Somewhere further in the tea house, a radio played something low and traditional, a string instrument asking a question it didn't answer. Yeonjai knew, Ma Young-hee said, 3 words. The tea house went very quiet around them. What did she know? Imani said, carefully, the way you step on ice you aren't certain about. She knew someone inside the organization was moving against Yiwon's clarity. Ma Young-hee's voice had the controlled, flat precision of someone who has been rehearsing this, and is still, after 3 years of rehearsal, finding it difficult. Not against his life, against his perception. Someone who needed him to be looking a specific direction, consuming his attention and his resources and his grief in a specific direction, while they built something he would not be able to see because he was too occupied with what he'd been given to look at. Had a name. Came to me 3 weeks before she died. She had done her own work quietly, carefully, the way Yeonjai did everything. She gave me the name. Ma Young-hee held her cup. And then 3 weeks later she was dead, and the official story was the Park Syndicate, and my son believed it because he had been carefully positioned to believe it. And she stopped. The string instrument on the distant radio resolved its question into something that wasn't quite an answer and continued. You held the name, Imani said. 3 years. Ma Young-hee set her cup down precisely. Because the person who holds the name of the person who arranged Yeonjai's death is the only thing standing between Yiwon and the moment he moves, and the moment he moves is the moment he becomes a target. Her eyes were direct and entirely without softness. I was not willing to bury my son to avenge my daughter-in-law. Yeonjai would not have wanted that either. At the next table, an elderly couple sat in the particular comfortable silence of people who have been sharing quiet for decades. The man poured tea for the woman with the careful attention of a ritual performed so many times it has become instinct. The woman received it the same way. Why now? Imani said. Why tell me? Because Soo-yeon is moving, Ma Young-hee said. She has been the management layer between the name and Yiwon's ignorance for 3 years. She has been compensated for that service. Now the park remnants in Busan are offering her a different arrangement, which means the existing arrangement is destabilizing, which means the person whose name I have been holding is about to become a person with an urgent problem. She held Imani's eyes. A person with an urgent problem is a person who creates problems for others. My granddaughter is in that house. My son is in that house. A controlled breath. And apparently you are also in that house. Apparently, Imani said. Yeonjai was right about you, Ma Young-hee said. She went directly toward the most true thing. Imani was very still. She never met me, she said carefully. No, Ma Young-hee agreed. But she knew the shape of what her family would need after she was gone. She was very specific about it in those last 3 weeks. About what Ariam would need, about what Yiwon would need. She reached into her cream leather handbag and withdrew a small folded piece of paper and placed it on the table between them with the deliberateness of someone setting down something that has been heavy for a long time. I'm not giving you this because I trust you, she said. I'm giving you this because you are the only person currently inside that house who is not already embedded in what I am trying to end. Imani looked at the folded paper on the lacquered table between them. Including Do-yeon, she said. Myung-hee's expression answered before her words did not accusation, not condemnation, but the clear-eyed assessment of a woman who loves someone and is still capable of seeing him accurately. Do-yeon is loyal, completely and genuinely, but loyalty and innocence are not the same thing, and he has been making decisions about what Yi-won should and should not know for long enough that his judgment about that specific question cannot be considered fully objective. Imani picked up the paper. Held it without opening it. If I take this, I have to tell him, she said. Yes. And when I tell him, everything changes. The version of him you've been trying to protect. Everything already changed, Myung-hee said. The morning a Black American woman stood in a school parking lot and told my son what he was doing to his daughter. She picked up her tea. I am simply giving you the last piece. What you do with the order of it, that I leave to you. What's written on that paper is going to rewrite every relationship in this house. If you think you already know the names, stay. Because you don't. She opened it in the car. Her own car, not one of Yi-won's vehicles, not a driver from the estate pool. A car she had called herself from a service she had set up independently in her second week, because some habits belonged to the version of herself that arrived here with an agenda, and she had not yet decided which of those habits to retire. The driver navigated out of Insadong's narrow alleys onto the broader road that would eventually take her back across the Han River toward Mapogu. Imani held the folded paper in her lap, angled toward the door, away from the driver's peripheral vision. She unfolded it. Read the name written in Myung-hee's precise, unhurried handwriting. Read it again, folded it. Placed it in the interior pocket of her camel coat, against her ribs where she could feel it, and looked out the window at Seoul doing its mid-morning work, delivery motorcycles threading between buses, a construction crane rotating slowly above a building going up in the middle distance, the Han River appearing ahead as they reached the bridge, wide and gray, and moving with the patient certainty of something that has been here far longer than anything built on its banks. The name was not Soo-yeon. She had prepared herself, riding toward Insadong, for the name to be Soo-yeon, the comfortable version. The version that would allow everything else to stay where it was, Do-yeon in his place, the estate staff in theirs, the organizational structure intact except for the removal of one external actor who had been managing her access to dangerous information. The name was not Soo-yeon. Soo-yeon was the mechanism, the management interface. The person who had been paid to keep the arrangement stable, who had kept it stable for 3 years, and who was now destabilizing it through the introduction of a competing buyer. The name on the paper was the origin point. The name on the paper was someone who sat at Yi-won's table, who had sat at it for longer than Soo-yeon had been in proximity to this household, who had access to the estate not as a visitor, but as someone whose access had never once been questioned, because the threat assessment that would have questioned it had been carefully, patiently, expertly redirected for exactly 3 years. The name on the paper was someone Imani had met. She pressed her palm flat against her knee and looked at the river, and breathed through the specific sensation of a floor shifting under her feet in a room she had believed she understood, and thought about Ariam's painting. The blue water in the fountain, the yellow sun above the house, the 3 figures in the garden, standing together in the light that the child had decided to put there. She thought about what the truth inside the folded paper would do to that painting. She thought about whether any version of it survived. She thought there was one. Barely. But only if everything that came next happened in the right order. She found him in the garden. He was at the dry fountain, his thinking place, she understood now, perhaps had always been, perhaps had been Yeonjai's thinking place before it was his, and that was why he kept returning to it even though or perhaps, because it was the place in the estate most saturated with her absence. He stood looking at the empty basin with his hands in his coat pockets, his long hair loose in the cold, and he heard her footsteps on the stone path and turned before she reached him. He read her face in approximately 2 seconds. What? He said. She reached into her coat and held out the folded paper. He took it, opened it. Read the single name written on it. The garden was very still. His expression did not break the way it had broken with the folder. That had been grief discovering it had been wrongly aimed, devastating but releasing, the specific relief that arrives alongside devastation when a weight you've been holding turns out to have been unnecessary. This was different. This was the cold, crystalline clarity of a picture that has just assembled itself into its final form and is worse and more total and more precise than any version that preceded it. He looked up from the paper. "My mother," he said. "She's been holding it for 3 years. Because she thought if she told me, she thought you would move immediately and become a target." Imani held his eyes. She was probably right. Was absolutely right. His voice was flat and specific and aimed at something internal. "He's been in this house. He sat at my table after the funeral. He guided my grief in the direction he needed it to go and He stopped. His jaw worked with the tension of a man doing very controlled things with something that does not want to be controlled. "I thanked him for his support. I thanked him." She said nothing. "Sometimes the right thing is nothing." "Ariam," he said. "She's inside with Sora. I told Sora to keep her upstairs until I came back. Needs to go somewhere he doesn't have access to." "Your mother's," Imani said. Something shifted in his expression. "You trust her." "Gave me the paper. She's been protecting you for 3 years at the cost of 3 years of your not knowing. That's not a comfortable kind of love, but it's not a dishonest one." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the name on the paper. Then he folded it with the careful precision of someone handling something that needs to be put somewhere it cannot be accessed by the wrong person, and placed it in his inner coat pocket. "Tonight," he said. "I'll have her ready in an hour." He nodded once short, the nod of transition, of a man moving from one mode to another mode, of a door closing on one version of what this evening might have been. He started toward the house, stopped without turning. "Imani." She waited. "After," he said. The word carried everything he wasn't finishing. The garden, the midnight, her name said differently, the things neither of them had named that had been accumulating since a parking lot in Mapugu 11 weeks ago. "When this is done, I want to talk about what we've been not talking about." "After," she said. He went inside. She stood at the dry fountain in the cold and looked at the empty basin and thought about Ariam's painting. The water she had put in it in confident blue strokes, the 3 figures standing in the garden in the sun, and thought that a 6-year-old who had not said a word in 3 years understood more about what this house needed than every adult inside it combined. Above her, the curtain in Ariam's window moved. The small face appeared, dark eyes, 2 pigtails, one hand pressed flat and warm against the glass. Imani raised her hand. They held it for a moment. The woman in the cold garden, the child in the warm window, and then Ariam turned away from the glass, and Imani turned toward the house. And inside the study above them, both Yiwon was already on the phone with someone Doyun didn't know about. His voice the cold, even absolute voice of a man who has just found his actual direction after 3 years of moving in the wrong one. Making arrangements for the kind of evening that a man only arranges when he has decided something ends tonight. 3 years. Tonight it ended. Ariam is packed and quiet and holds Imani's hand all the way to Myung-hee's door without once looking back at the estate. The word she has been holding for 3 years is almost ready. The name on the paper is about to walk into a meeting he was invited to and find something very different from what he was told to expect. And what Doyun does in the next 12 hours, what he chooses, whose side of the line he stands on when the line is finally drawn, is the question that determines whether everything Ariam painted survives into the next morning. Stay for episode 3.